Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Now we're told that our distinguished guest has been waiting for a while. Without further ado, we're now being joined by Captain Rowland Iyayi, the one-time Director General of Nigeria Airspace Management Agency and President and CEO Top Brass Aviation. Many thanks for joining us this morning, Captain Iyayi.
Thank you very much, Oji, and thank you, Kadi.
Perfect. I mean, we're talking about Nigeria Air at this point. Now, just less than 72 hours to the end of President Muhammadu Buhari's government, the outgoing Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, unveiled Nigeria Air at the Nnamdi Azikiwe Airport. Now, many have described this as a last-minute push by the minister to fulfill his promise to deliver the national carrier to Nigeria, despite court orders to halt the operation. Now, just a quick question to you. Does this landing of that aircraft in Abuja signal the birthing of a national carrier?
Thank you very much, Oji. I doubt very much if flying an aircraft into an airport and having a water salute to show people that there's an aircraft that's just been painted in the colors of Nigeria Air would amount to birthing an airline. The truth of the matter is, I think what the Honorable Minister, the outgoing minister, has done is nothing short of taking Nigerians for a big ride. And I think it's a monumental fraud to assume that by sort of conniving with Ethiopian Airlines, having an aircraft that was on a commercial flight for Ethiopian Airlines on the 21st of May, which is about maybe a week ago, flying into Tel Aviv on an ET-405 flight, to fly into Abuja only for a static display and then taking out will mean to birth an airline. That particular aircraft flew out of Abuja yesterday, and as I speak is back in Ethiopia. And I can tell you that presently the decals of Nigeria Air stock on it is being removed, and it's been quickly rebranded Ethiopian Airlines to be put back in service. So essentially all that we saw 2 days ago was basically a charade by the outgoing Minister of Aviation, possibly to sort of block out maybe, considering the fact that in the last 6-7 years, we've had about 85.42 billion in terms of budgetary allocations to Nigeria Air, which is supposedly a private enterprise. So we have a lot of issues here that are not explained. And I think this desperate move by the outgoing minister is just one in a line of several things he's done to undermine the entire Nigerian populace.
I touched on the court order. The airline operators of Nigeria, which you belong, sued the minister and Ethiopia Airline and obtained that order of the Federal High Court against both parties not to proceed. Now, until the determination of the substantive suit. Now, has that court order been vacated? Do you think Ethiopia is aware of this court order and went ahead to participate in this?
Again, as a matter of fact, there are 3 orders of court which the Honorable Minister and Ethiopian Airlines are familiar with. They know about them. They have been served. The attorneys representing the AON have written to them, copied them, also had the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority in copy and all the relevant agencies to be aware of these orders of court. Indeed, what was done 2 days ago is a flagrant abuse of the Nigerian judicial system. And I think the full weight of a law should be brought to bear on the Honorable Minister and Ethiopian Airlines, as a matter of fact, because I do not see them as having been good corporate citizens. I cannot even imagine a Nigerian entity operating out of Ethiopia having been held by a court order not to continue with the process would go ahead and do what was done 2 days ago in Ethiopia. It will never happen. So for them to have come to Nigeria to do this shows the absolute contempt they have for the Nigerian people. And I don't think, to a large extent, they will make good partners. So I believe what is being done, again, is a total undermining of our judicial system, our processes, and a country and a people which indeed must be held, the Honorable Minister must be held accountable for. It is untold that you cannot do this and walk away for it.
You have taken care of NAMA, and you've worked in the aviation industry for quite a while now. When you have an aircraft of that nature coming in, what's the process of bringing it into Nigeria? Please talk us through it, because some people online especially have been asking, how did he manage to bring an aircraft that does not belong to Nigeria into Nigeria and claim that it's part of the Nigeria Air, which he is trying to float, which according to a court of law is not even allowed to fly? How do we explain it?
Well, essentially, I mean, if you have a foreign aircraft wanting to fly into Nigeria, the process is for you to file what you call a clearance to the authorities in Nigeria, indicating where you're coming, the type of aircraft coming, the crew operating, and to indicate the intent. Invariably, what we have today is the Honorable Minister of Aviation, obviously, making sure that this particular flight, comes in, would have told the authorities to go ahead and issue the clearance, in any case, for the flight to come in. The flight came in as a technical flight. It didn't come in as a commercial flight. So you can consider that to be a visiting aircraft. So for a visiting aircraft, within 48 hours of filing a clearance and to fly into your airspace and all that, a clearance is usually issued by the NCAA and the Nigerian Airspace Management Agency. So indeed, I would not see a situation where Ethiopian Airlines ordinarily would want to fly an aircraft into Nigeria and will be denied the clearance to come in. So they took advantage of that loophole, and that's exactly what they exploited.
So in doing that then, you then begin to wonder, what kind of relationship is there between the Minister of Aviation and the Ethiopian airline that makes it possible for them to have a relationship that does not represent Nigeria in any way, shape, or form, and that is not fair to Nigeria, based on some of the things you have alluded to, that if it was Ethiopian government, they will never allow this kind of thing to happen. What kind of relationship do they have? Is there something in the underbelly of it that might be criminal or corrupt?
Well, I wouldn't know exactly the direct relationship because I'm not privy to the meetings they've had. But what I can say clearly is this. Ethiopian Airlines, a couple of years ago, approached Air Peace to have Air Peace partner with it. Air Peace thought the arrangement was an above-board arrangement and followed through with it to a point where negotiations were being had, only for Ethiopian to tell Air Peace that, look, there was no point for Air Peace to aspire to grow its airline or do whatever it is. They were willing to provide Air Peace, as a matter of fact, pay Air Peace rent of $32 million per annum for Air Peace to sit back and allow them run the show. And what Air Peace had asked them essentially was, where does that leave other airlines in the country? Where does that leave my country? And where does that leave my staff? And these were not answers they could able to know. They were not able to provide, answers to all these. In any case, what we see going on now with the Honorable Minister of Aviation and Ethiopia would amount to something similar, because if you take cognizance of a structure of how this whole thing came to be, it is almost certain that there's no transparency. Everybody that's been told, we've been told are part of this process have denied being part of it. So you ask the question, who are those supposedly the private enterprise owners of Air Nigeria or Nigeria Air?
Yeah,
nobody has come forward to say, we are the owners.
Well, that brings me to my question, actually. That brings me to my question, because there's been that confusion on the ownership of the Nigeria Air. Now, the minister had alluded earlier that he made an announcement that there was 46% of shares that belong to some Nigerian entities, including the Nigeria Sovereign Wealth. But they have debunked it. They said they don't have anything to do with Nigeria Air. And the minister later said it was a mistake. He also said that the Nigerian government owns 5%. Who really owns that 46% or the remainder 46% that the minister says now? And 49% is said to belong to Ethiopia. Do you really know who owns the 46%?
Okay, I can say this. Given the papers were filed in court, essentially, what we have gone to court to say to the court is the entire process, the bidding, the selection, and whatever it is that we have today was not transparent. Again, we went to court to say that, you know, most of the things that have been alluded, like we're saying on this program, we actually have proof to indicate that these are things that run counter to the provisions of the ICRC laws for the country. And we have asked the court to, you know, simply interpret our position and see if indeed we're correct. If we're correct, then means the entire process is wrong. Now, the minister had approached the public and said that 5% of this entity will be held by the Nigerian Civil Wealth Fund. They came out within minutes and said, no, we're not part of it. Then again, the minister said 46% will be held by Nigerian institutional investors. Now, so far, we have MRS and SACOR as the supposed Nigerian institutional investors. Meanwhile, SACOR is a company under the group CFAX. CFAX actually put in a bid for the concession of Murtala Mohammed Airport in Lagos and never wanted to be part of Nigeria Air. But for whatever reasons, he was put as a member of that institutional investor team. And they know very little about it. That's much we found out so far. So invariably, we're asking the question, if CFAX is not part of this 46%, we haven't heard from MRS, who exactly is holding those shares? And if they've been held, is it by proxy for who? So these are questions we have raised in the court documents that were presented to the courts for interpretation. And when we see what was filed by the ministry as their defense, indeed what they said was that this process is a PPP process. But the Ethiopian Airlines defense said no, that they know nothing about a PPP, and that the 49% that they have acquired in this project is absolute. So our question is, if 49% is absolute, how much is 49% worth? And then the 46%, is it allocated or paid for by way of subscription? By whom? All of these are questions we have asked that have never been answered, not by the minister, not by the ministry, and not by Ethiopian Airlines. All Ethiopian Airlines has said is that this is a business, they have put in a bid, they have won, and it is clear, and the 46% is absolute. Then when we now take cognizance of the fact that between 2016 and 2022, the federal government has budgeted 85.42 billion as appropriation for Nigeria Air. Where has that money gone to? Now, if that money represents 5%, how much has Ethiopian Airlines, for the 49% it's holding, how much have they put in the coffers of the federal government? How much do we have in the central bank today? Now, a quick one. Qatar Airways took out 49% of Rwanda Air, and they paid $1.3 billion. Qatar Airways, Rwanda Air. Rwanda does not have the market size Nigeria has. Rwanda does not have the number of multilateral and bilateral agreements Nigeria has. So how do you, who does the valuation? How do you value 49%? So these are questions that have not been answered. And we're asking, if indeed this whole process is transparent and it is meant to be for the benefit of the Nigerian people, why there's so much desperation, particularly in the last 2 weeks by the Honorable Minister? Why do you not allow the incoming government to address these issues as best as can be done for the benefit of the Nigerian people? So we see a lot of issues here that need to be addressed by the incoming government. And we're worried because we think very clearly that this is a process being put in place by the Honorable Minister to sort of hamstrung the incoming government to a point where it is almost impossible for them not to default. Because when we saw the agreement that was put together by the ministry for this particular transaction, it was drafted by the ministry and presented to Ethiopia. The ministry gave Ethiopian undue competitive advantage. Ethiopia had said they would engage in predatory pricing for upwards of between 12 and 24 months in order to be able to penetrate the market. All of that put together, we read, to mean that Ethiopia is coming to destroy the domestic market, not for the benefit of the consumers, because by the time the competition is no longer there, consumer prices will go up because it will become an issue of demand and supply. So we've seen all of this through in all the paperwork we put before the courts, and that's why we said to the minister, if indeed you mean well, this will not be the path you'll be charting. At this point in time, it is too late in the day. You've had 8 years, you've done very little. In the last 2 weeks, you're trying to make everything happen. It cannot work. I set up an airline. It took me 18 months to be awarded, to be issued an air operator certificate. So how do you intend to be able to acquire that in 2 weeks? So these are questions that ordinarily any sensible thinking person in the industry would say, this is an impossibility. What you saw 2 days ago was a mere charade, and I believe clearly a monumental fraud. And we're going to pursue the matter in court to ensure that the contempt action of the Honorable Minister is brought to justice.
Well, you call it a complete charade. There are reports that that airline or that airplane was a rented airplane from Ethiopia, and it's registered to Ethiopian Airlines, and that the plane is actually gone back to Ethiopia at this point. I'd like you to address that. And there's also been reports credited to promoters of Nigeria Air that AON members are only scared of competition. How true is this?
Well, first of all, like I said earlier, I mean, this aircraft flew in on the 21st of May. I have it on record that the same aircraft operated a commercial flight on behalf of Ethiopian Airlines to Tel Aviv. The flight number was ET405. I mean, that can be checked. Now, between 21st and 27th of May, this aircraft was taken out of service, rebranded, and flown into Abuja. And that was essentially what you saw 2 days ago. So we do not believe that all of that is totally unfounded. Talking about renting the aircraft, I wouldn't know if there was any monies paid for the rental. However, because Ethiopian Airlines and the Honorable Ministers are in cahoot, I would expect that whatever they've come together to agree maybe was what was made manifest on Friday. When you talk about competition, the industry thrives on competition. But what we do not want is destructive competition. Because when you bring in a carrier that would engage in predatory pricing, then of course what you're doing is to destroy the competition in the market. We're not afraid of competition as AON. In the last 6 months, 3 new airlines have come into the market. You had ValueJet, we have Reno Air, and now Binani. We're not even afraid to have more, because the more, the merrier. I mean, Nigeria is a wide and is a vast country that needs, access to markets. And the only thing that can be done is to have more players in the market that can actually focus on the different sectors to ensure that this market access is guaranteed. Because if you look at it, the aviation sector is actually, at this point, is a social service, should be looked at. Because that is essentially making sure that you can have market access. If we do have good market access, you're talking about FDIs coming into the country, you're talking about development, tourism, all sorts of things can be tied to the growth of aviation, and we want to make sure that what we have achieved so far is not destroyed simply because a couple of individuals feel it's their birthright to just come in there and decimate the market for their own benefits. That is what we're fighting, not the competition. Competition is welcome and is good.
I've got 2 very short questions. The first one is to ask you, the agreement that was put together by the minister. You alluded to the fact that it was done by the Ministry of Aviation. Is it that our members of staff in the Ministry of Aviation and the legal department there don't know what is right and cannot advise the minister that this is wrong and stand their ground that we will not be part of drafting an agreement that negates what we signed up for?
Well, again, I honestly do not know how the ministry works because I have not necessarily worked in the ministry. But I understand the process by which a national agreement can be put together. Assuming there was a draft agreement put together by by the ministry, through the legal department in the ministry, that particular agreement should have been sent to the Ministry of Justice for vetting. And it is only after that agreement has been vetted by the Ministry of Justice officials and found to be representative of the interest of Nigeria, that is the only time the ministry can now be told to present that particular agreement to Ethiopian or whoever that partner is. But in this case, the ministry had that agreement drafted. It was put as part of a package that was presented to Ethiopian. We got a copy of that particular agreement. And that agreement was talking about the Nigerian government assuming the liabilities and indemnifying the project and Ethiopian Airlines. Now, what that means, if you're saying that Nigeria Air is a private entity, you're saying that you want the Nigerian government to indemnify the debts of Nigeria Air, that's supposedly a private entity. You're not doing the same for Azman, for Max Air, for Air Peace, for United. So what are we talking about? Okay. You cannot provide you're creating an unlevel playing field and you expect competition to thrive. It will not, because you create a distortion already.
So we've got.
So you cannot tell them to come in and have a 15-year tax moratorium when the domestic airlines don't have that.
Captain Iyayi.
Yes.
We've got just 1 minute to go. So very quickly, can you help me understand? I've flown Arik Air from Lagos to London, Lagos to New York, and then we've also flown Air Peace into different places within Africa. Is it that this minister has done much more than any other minister to destroy the aviation sector, or what's your own assessment? Very briefly, very briefly.
Well, given the actions, particularly in the last couple of months, the legacy he's leaving is one of destruction in his wake, because you cannot be saying that you're looking to grow an industry, that you're now coming up with a contraption that ultimately will decimate the entire industry. Who benefits? So in my view, the actions he's taken, particularly in the last couple of months, has done nothing but to negate the growth the sector has seen in the last several months.
All right.
Several years, rather.
Well, all right. Everyone is talking about we need a national carrier to expand our reach on a global basis, to position ourselves for a single air transport market, to be competitive under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Really quickly, do we need a national carrier?
I don't think so. We have flag carriers. When you designate private airlines to operate your bilateral or multilateral agreements, those are flag carriers. All the airlines you have worldwide today, typically, most airlines you have in the world today are flag carriers. The British Airways of this world, Virgin Atlantic and the rest of them, they're all flag carriers. As a matter of fact, in the whole of America, there is not one single national carrier. You have flag carriers. So what we are saying is, you have encouraged entrepreneurs, private entrepreneurs, to come into this sector. Why don't you encourage the same people, given the right conditions, which you're trying to do now for a national carrier? Why don't you give the same private entrepreneurs the same conditions as flag carriers to fly the flag of Nigeria all over the world? Why don't we do that? Why don't we position Nigeria with the mass market we have, with the structures we have? Why don't we position Nigeria as the largest aviation market on the continent? Why don't we become the beautiful bride rather than give all of these away to other people? Ethiopia has no market except, of course, Nigeria. Over 40% of passengers on Ethiopian Airlines are Nigerians. And they understand that. So coming into Nigeria essentially is to consolidate that hold and see how it is they can now use that to dominate the entire continent. We cannot afford to let ours go. We're talking about capital flight. When this happens, it will be worse. So these are things we need to take cognizance of. We should put Nigeria first in everything we'll do. Not necessarily because, the personal interest should not override national interest. That's what we're saying. So invariably, what we need to do right now is to look at how we can consolidate the entire industry, ensure we have strong flag carriers to carry and fly the flag for Nigeria. We have the likes of Azman, we have Air Peace, we have Max Air, and of course, Ibom Air is already acquiring new aircraft. So why don't we consolidate these whole entities and ensure that we can, make them stronger by giving them the right conditions to operate? I mean, the environment in which you operate in Nigeria is particularly hostile, which is why all these conditions of tax moratorium and all the rest of it is being given to Nigeria, supposedly a private entity. Why don't you do that for, the other flag carriers, and let's see how it works.
All right. The conversation will surely continue. Well, thank you very much, Captain Iyayi, for joining us on the morning show.